So it's been said that every preacher has about 6 sermons that he or she repeats over and over again. Some might argue there's only one sermon, really. So depending on how you look at reality, today is one of the 6, or this is the only one. This is the one that I am most passionate about because I think it's that important. And because as I look around, I see Christians and Christian leaders like myself neglecting the truth that I want to point to today. In the same way, as I said a couple weeks ago, we divide into 2 camps. There's the grace camp and the works camp. And we have arguments across camps as we have people who argue we should just pray more, we should just discern the will of God. And then we have the other people, we got to roll up our sleeves and do stuff. We got to get involved. But the truth is, we got to do both to become more fully mature as Christians and as a church. Otherwise, we devolve into the kind of people who are so heavenly minded, they are no earthly good. Or what Parker Palmer calls functional atheists. People who say they believe in God, but in reality, they believe in their own self-will. We can do both. And we need to do both if we're going to live in Christ, which is what Paul's great challenge throughout his letters are to the people of faith. As you've heard me say, we've got to develop the muscles of receptivity and the muscles of activity. They're both important. We must learn to receive and we must learn to give. But don't take my word for it. Just look all around you and look within you. The mystery that I'm pointing to today can be found in all of creation and in all of our bodies and in the relationship between our bodies and the body we call creation. Think about it for a moment. The trees send forth oxygen and they take in carbon dioxide. You and I breathe out carbon dioxide, and we take in oxygen. You see the reciprocity built into the very fabric of creation, the receiving and the giving and the receiving in one eternal flow. Now, can you imagine if we took 2 minutes right now and all we did was breathe in? I suspect it wouldn't go so well. Or on the other side, what if we just breathed out, all of us, for 2 minutes? No, don't do it. It's, we're still coming out of the pandemic here. But I suspect if we did that, the sirens would show up pretty quickly. We'd be dropping like flies. Because it doesn't work like that. We don't work like that. We need both. We need the rhythm that's built into creation itself, into all of us. We need to honor that in our spiritual lives, as Jesus did. I don't think anybody would accuse Jesus of not being committed to prayer. And I don't think anybody would accuse Jesus of not being committed to mission. Jesus spent time alone with God in solitude. He went on retreat. He stepped away for Sabbath time, away from the active ministry that he was engaged in, and he taught and he preached and he fed and he healed and he blessed and he cast out demons. He did all of it. And that's why he was such an icon for all of us as we consider what it's like to become Christians in the most mature sense of the word. So today, in the final 2 steps of the 12-step program, we're going to see this same rhythm. Step 11, breathing in. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. Step 11. And step 12, breathing out. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs, which is what the psalmist is saying today. We got to pass it on to our children and their children and so forth. That's how it happens. So let's take those one at a time. Now, it's not surprising when Bill W. wrote the Big Book in 1954, which gave birth to the 12-step program, which has morphed into many different types of support programs. But it wasn't surprising that he used the word prayer. It was surprising that he used the word meditation. Now, when we were on retreat, the men, we were away a couple weeks ago, we spent each morning 20 minutes in silence in the forest, being present to God, meditating. Somebody came up to me after that and he said, I left my previous church because the pastor there said that Christians ought not to meditate. Have you ever been taught that? That somehow speaking to God is okay, but spending time hanging out with God, listening, is not okay. Think about prayer in this way. Yes, it's about communication, but it's also about communion. Think of a genuine dialogue. If you're having a genuine dialogue, you're not just talking. That's a monologue. You're listening. They're both important. And think of any relationship that's intimate in your life that has grown to the next level. You're not just always constantly talking to each other. You're doing things together. You're hanging out together. You're being silent together. That's how genuine relationship happens, not through words, but also through presence and through silence. That's what Jesus is getting at when he says, abide in me as I abide in you, for apart from me, you can do nothing. That's what Jesus is trying to impart to the disciples when he says, if you want to pray, go into your inner room and shut the door, and your Father who hears in secret will meet you there. The original hearers would have understood this metaphorically because nobody in the time of Jesus, other than the wealthiest of the wealthiest, had an inner room. There were no inner rooms. The inner room was the heart, and everyone would have understood that. And the mystics have described contemplative prayer as a prayer of the heart. And again, the heart, as I've said, is not just the emotions. It's the intellect and it's the will. It's the fullness. It's the center of our humanity. It is the prayer of the heart in the deepest sense of the word. One of the reasons I think we struggle with prayer and meditation is I think when push comes to shove, we're not always sure that there is a personal God. I think we struggle with that. Now, most religious traditions, most religious people will acknowledge there is a divine essence at the heart of reality, pulsating through creation, including us. And this is a good teaching. We can trust this teaching. But Christianity and the Judeo-Christian tradition takes it a step further. Our tradition teaches that God is personally involved, personally engaged in the living of our lives. God calls us by name. God forgives. God heals. God inspires us as we live this life, as we go through the ups and downs. If you talk to any of the men who went on the retreat, they may tell you that God personally spoke to them and met them in their time of retreat. Through the dreams that they had, through the encounter with nature, with creatures, with creation, and through the listening and speaking in these sacred circles we call men's council, where we're conditioned to not crosstalk, not fix or save or advise, engaging in the argumentative mind where many of us live most of our lives, but creating space for something new and surprising and gracious to happen without our contriving, without our doing anything. I wouldn't be standing in a pulpit today if God hadn't personally met me in the course of my life. And every time I pray, I'm continuing a conversation that began years ago. And every time I pray, I envision it this way, that I, as a child of God, am sitting on the lap of love, the one whose lap communicates to me that I love you completely and perfectly and personally. That's what we affirm as Christians. In several of Paul's letters, including the one that Liz read today, he talks about faith being a process of transforming or renewing our minds, which I think is an affirmation that prayer isn't about changing God, it's about being changed ourselves. It's about putting on the mind of Christ, and it's about installing a new operating system, an operating system that moves us past the argumentative, calculating mind where we're constantly arguing. Have you ever noticed when somebody's argumentative, you can't get your point across? It's actually impossible. It doesn't work. Try it. Try it in your marriage. We are called to a new mind, a contemplative mind that is able to see things holistically. Doesn't have to pull things apart. Understands that there are deeper patterns woven into creation itself, woven into all of us. And the contemplative mind is a radical departure from the calculating mind. It is able to be receptive to the flow of reality in a way that the calculating mind can never be. And because it's able to be receptive, it's able to flow more gracefully and easily, so to speak, with life. And it doesn't have a need to make reality into something that it isn't. It can move with things as they are at their essence, no matter how messy and no matter how unclear our lives may be. At Christine's ordination, I shared a favorite prayer that I use almost at every meeting. It's, Lord, be with us and help us to be with you. I don't think I have to pray the first part. I think God is eternally with us. I think we're the ones who are not present to God. We're the ones who are sleepwalking through life. We are the ones who are not in conscious contact with God. And so we need the Lord to help us to be with God. That's where most of us need help, to be more fully present to God who dwells at the heart of reality. Which leads to step 12, which is ultimately about taking this transformation that's happening in our lives and becoming a transforming presence in the world. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Or as the Quakers say, the service begins when the worship ends. This is not service. Coming to worship is not going to services. This is what prepares us for service in the world. Now, we are given an opportunity to invest here and to pray here, but the real work happens out there in the Spirit of Christ. That's where our vision statement leads us. That's why it lands on the word serve. This past week in Dr. King's Strength to Love, which we're reading together on Tuesday mornings, this is what Dr. King said, and forgive the masculine language. He says, in spite of the noble affirmations of Christianity, the church has often lagged in concern for social justice, and too often been content to mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. It has often been so absorbed in a future good over yonder that it forgets the present evils down here. Yet the church, he writes, is challenged to see that the Christian gospel is a two-way road. On the one side, it seeks to change the souls of men and thereby unite them with God. And on the other, it seeks to change the environmental conditions of men. Any religion that professes to be concerned with the souls of men and yet is not concerned with the economic and social conditions that cripple them is the kind the Marxists referred to as the opiate or the narcotic of the people. Step 12 affirms the need for us to be a transforming presence in the world, reconciling, restoring things to their original intention. But it also affirms this mystery that many teachers have stumbled upon in their teaching, that the best way to learn something isn't to remain a perpetual student, although that's important. It's to actually teach it, That's how we learn things. That's why raising kids can be such a gift in our lives, because we learn things at a deeper level. That's why teaching Sunday school is such an effective way to grow in faith, because when we have to simplify something, we actually learn it better for ourselves. And that's why I don't shy away from calling you to serve. And I don't take that seriously, your resistance to serve. Now, I try to respect it. I realize that most of us feel ill-equipped, but I don't see that as a problem. I actually think the best teachers, the best leaders do feel ill-equipped, and the question is, what do you do next? Does that felt sense of not being equipped enough to do the work, does that lead us to prayer and meditation, which I think it ought to, or not? The temptation there is to keep saying no because you don't feel ready to do something. But who among us is ever ready to do anything truly important in life? And isn't my mentor right when he said, Mark, the work teaches you how to do it? The work teaches us how to do it. And so we're called to serve before we ever feel ready to serve, and God help us from ever being people who feel ready to serve, because those are dangerous people. Nobody feels equipped to do the things that God calls us to do, or else they wouldn't be a calling from God. They ought to lead us to prayer where God can encourage us and inspire us and lead us as we seek to lead others. Bill Plotkin makes the case that Americans live in a patho-adolescent culture where narcissism and selfishness have run amok. And the beauty of the 12-step program is it provides not only a diagnosis to our problem, but it also provides the solution. In the 12-step program and in the big book, Bill W. says this. He says, above everything else, above everything, we alcoholics must rid ourselves of our selfishness, or else it will kill us. We must rid ourselves of our selfishness. And what rids us of selfishness? More than service. More than service. Jim Taylor shared this story, and I shared it a couple years ago, but it bears repeating. He was our men's retreat leader before Dan Dahlquist led us this time. And he talks about this story early in his ministry, and he was in a face-to-face meeting with a major donor in his church, a well-respected elder who came into his office to complain, as sometimes people do. And this guy named Larry was angry, he was shaking, his face was red, he was frustrated with Jim's emphasis every Sunday on love, 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 and serving the most vulnerable, which in the community that he serves was the migrant workers that were part of that 40% of the community. And he was challenging his congregation to go out and love their neighbor and serve them with Christ's love. And so this guy was getting tired of it. And he said, I've had it up to here with love. To which Jim said, well, Jesus. And he said, there you go again. Jesus this, Jesus that, always Jesus, always talking. And he said, man, Larry, that's all I got. That's my card. Of course, all I do is talk about Jesus. And then came the death knell for Jim's ministry. But it actually became the opening to Jim claiming the authority that God wanted to give him to be a prophetic leader. And Larry said, you know, I'm going to leave because I'm just not being fed. So Jim leaned in. He said, Larry, how long you been a member here? 35 years, which was code for 35 years I've been fed till now, and you. He said, how long you been an elder? 15 years. 15 years I've been an elder in this place. Jim looked at him and said, you know, isn't it about time you pick up a fork? The 12 steps recognize that most of us don't grow without some tough love. I was taught as a counselor to stroke and kick. And everybody loves the stroking part. Just stroke me, pastor. Stroke me, counselor. Stroke me, therapist. Just on and on. It just feeds narcissism if that's all we're doing, right? We don't like the kick, but look back on your life. It's the kick that often moves us forward and gets us to do something that in the end not only transforms us, but transforms the communities that we are a part of. The kick is the one thing powerful enough to help us grow beyond our inherent and increasingly conditioned narcissism. And we can't help but be narcissistic in the culture that we're living in today. You see, passive membership in churches or 12-step programs creates not only passive dependency, which is unhealthy, but ultimately devolves into passive aggressiveness. That's the only place it can go. Whereas active membership, engaged membership, participatory membership is what in the end the 12 steps and healthy church and healthy theology is leading us towards. And it has the power to free us from the prison of our narcissism. John Wooden said it much simpler than I just did. He said, happiness begins when selfishness ends. I think that's what Jesus is teaching the disciples. Whosoever shall find their life, shall save their life, will lose it. And I think that's what Paul is getting at today. He says, put away your old life and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. See, the 12 steps understand that having experienced what it's like to be fed, we must pick up our fork and start feeding others. Because we are all teaching something that we are still coming to understand. And the best way to learn something is to teach it. A good sponsor, a good mentor, a good professor, a good pastor understands that in their bones. And that is what keeps us in the flow of the giving and the receiving and the breathing in and the breathing out. And that is what awakens us to the truth that yes, we are doing something. We really are. But someone is doing something in us and through us. Amen.